Michael Reiner is a huge Pittsburgh Steelers fan. Goes to many of their games throughout the season, has been a diehard Steelers fan his whole life. And me and Mike have had a lot of conversations around the Steelers and football because, I think Mike is one of the realest, truest Steelers fans there are out there. And Mike, I gotta tell you, everybody's out there saying they're so shocked by this 7-2 start and how well Pittsburgh's playing. And I'm like, it's kind of what I predicted this year. Like, I looked at the Steelers' schedule and I thought the first 9 weeks they had to go 6-3 because the back half of the schedule is so tough.
Yeah, Brandon, when I look at the Steelers this year, I think they've surpassed everybody's expectations on the offensive side of the football. But defensively, they're still the elite team on defense that we've seen for many, many years. I agree with you, Brandon. It's a situation where, they had to win a certain number of these games to be able to be competitive down the stretch in the playoffs. And I think Mike Tomlin and Arthur Smith have done an excellent job. If you think about it, they really could be going into this game with Baltimore at 7-1 because they were one play away from beating Dallas at home.
Yeah. And that
So
was a weird game. I mean, I could barely stay awake for it. It was the game that was delayed a couple hours, 1 o'clock in the morning. Were you at that game?
we were at that game. So when it happened, we all went out there. We were ready for the game. And then the storm starts coming down, all the rain. But the crazy thing was, everyone paid so much for the tickets, and everyone, you know, wanted to see this game so bad that I don't think anybody left the stadium, which was pretty unique and pretty awesome. Uh, so we got to see that firsthand. One of the greatest games you'll ever see by Dak Prescott. I know that Brandon's an Eagles fan, and he can't take he can't give the Cowboys any kind of credit or Dak.
That's not true. I've actually given the Cowboys a lot of credit in my time. Now, I did not predict Dallas to have a very good year this year. I was actually, we'll get into this a little bit later, Mike, but I was not one of, I feel like only a few people in the world who thought Washington would have a better season than Dallas this year. Um, just because of, the makeup of both rosters. But yeah, I agree with you. Pittsburgh really could be 7-1, but really, here's the thing. And tell me if you agree or not. So obviously the change happened at Justin Fields to Russell Wilson. And outside of a couple of deep balls that Russ threw, obviously the Pickens against Washington and then the Mike Williams, excuse me, the play there, obviously to win Pittsburgh the game. Like I feel like just watching them. Maybe the deep ball adds that extra element to the offense that maybe Fields wasn't providing, but it doesn't look different at all. I don't feel like there's much of an upgrade there between the two.
Brandon, I'm going to disagree with you. I think it's a huge upgrade, not because of necessarily where you see the ball is. It's about could the Steelers sustain drives? One of the big issues with the carousel of Kenny Pickett, Mason Rudolph, and that whole combination last year, Mitch Trubisky, was that they could not sustain a drive. When it was third down, they couldn't make it past the sticks. Now Russell Wilson and his veteran savvy, he's able to keep drives going. He's able to enhance Najee Harris's game, enhance George Pickens. These other pieces of the offense have been talented, but they haven't been able to put it together like they put it together so far this year. I'm looking forward to seeing what they do down the stretch, Brandon, because other than the recent injury to Alex Highsmith, which surprisingly will only keep him out 2 to 3 weeks, I think that this is a team that's very healthy. I think it's a team when they're ready to contend, they'll get all their players back. And this is a team that could win a playoff game or two. I'm not saying that they're going to beat, the Kansas Cities, the Buffaloes, things like that. But this is a team that's competitive, and this is a team that could win the AFC North because of their defense and because of their veteran leadership and the fact that Russell Wilson does not turn over the football.
You mentioned the savviness and Russ's ability to sustain drives, but what is he specifically doing that maybe Fields just wasn't doing enough that, you think that Tomlin, because I thought all along the reason why they made the switch was because one, they kind of promised Russ the job. And two, because they didn't want to pay Chicago that fourth round pick for Fields if he played more than 50% of the snaps.
Well, I think Brandon, what to answer your question as far as what Russell Wilson has done, I mean, he's definitely opened up the deep ball, and that's made the Steelers tough to defend. I mean, when you look at the teams that go through quarterback issues, that aren't where they need to be, you think about the Chicago's, you think about Indianapolis Colts, all those teams, they have a quarterback issue, but it's because they don't throw the ball down the field. And I think, you know, this issue is presenting itself with many teams, and the Steelers escaped that situation. And they found a guy who threw 28 touchdown passes last year on a terrible football team, and they got him for nothing. So just makes you think, everybody's saying the Steelers should tank, the Steelers should fire Mike Tomlin. You know, the players react to him, and the players don't think they're bigger than the coach. And I think that's a lot to respect because on other teams, the Jets, the Bears, the Cowboys, players will comment on coaches and general managers, and that's not the way to do it. I think Mike Tomlin and company have figured something out this year. We'll see how the next 8 games go because they're going to be the toughest in football. They haven't played a division game yet. So they have two against Baltimore, two against Cleveland, two against Cincinnati. We'll see how all of that goes. And of course, your Philadelphia Eagles on the road. I see that as an Eagles win, the way that they're playing right now. But we'll see what happens. And I think this Steeler team, when you look at it, I mean, it's them and Buffalo as the second best teams in the AFC.
So you put Pittsburgh and Buffalo both ahead of Baltimore. That's interesting. Why?
I put them ahead of Baltimore because Baltimore has forgotten to play how to play defense.
No, it's true. I mean, if it wasn't for, Zach Taylor going for that 2-point conversion th Thursday night, maybe Baltimore doesn't get the fumble and there was that lucky 84-yard touchdown, that Baltimore had, maybe they don't even beat Cincinnati. So, I think the Ravens, the weird thing about them is it's like they can be so dominant and they can also lose at the same time because they just don't know how to finish games. But Lamar, I believe he's 1-4. It could be even 1-5 in his career against Pittsburgh. Some of that has been, he hasn't played a lot because of either it was COVID or illness or injury. But what has the Steeler defense and regime done specifically to slow down that Baltimore attack?
Well, they rush him and they get him on the ground. They've sacked him a number of times in every game they played. And the other thing is they sustain drives and keep him off the field. The one time that he actually beat the Steelers, yeah, because the second time that year was Robert Griffin. So the last time the Steelers lost a regular season series to Baltimore, they lost both games to them in 2019. So just to like gain some perspective, um, I mean, Lamar Jackson has only defeated Mason Rudolph. Um, Mason Rudolph, who was coming in, for Duck Hodges at the time.
And by the way,
So I think,
Mason Rudolph got Pittsburgh to the playoffs last year, and I think people forget that.
right. And it's like, here's the thing, Brandon. It's like the Steelers have the perfect defense to play Lamar Jackson. They play downhill, they play in your face, they play smash mouth football, and they have maybe, a top 5 player in the world, TJ Watt, on the side chasing him down. So, in my opinion, Brandon, that's just it. They get in Lamar's face. I feel like every other team in the NFL lets him run, lets him play his game. And it's going to take a lot for Lamar Jackson to beat the Steelers. I'm going to say it might be a little bit easier than last time. I think the Steelers do win this game by a field goal because I think they're feeding off of the fact that a lot of people don't think they're better than Baltimore. But Lamar Jackson has to go win this game. This Steelers run defense is excellent. I think they're going to do what they can to stop Derrick Henry. They're not going to keep him out of the end zone, but they'll limit him on yards. I think that Mike Tomlin and Terrell Austin and that whole team is going to make Lamar Jackson win this game. He's going to have to go out and win it.
Mike, there's another team in the AFC North that's so weird to me because they're 4-6. They blew it feels like 3 or 4 games. Like they really could be 7-2, but their defense was atrocious, obviously, at the start of the year. Yet, if you tell me you're going to give me Joe Burrow and those weapons, and they haven't had a great defense. And, the last time Cincinnati and Burrow was healthy, the earliest they've been eliminated is the AFC Championship game. So, I know people are starting to discount Cincinnati because of the loss to Baltimore Thursday night. And again, I think that Cincinnati will probably split with Pittsburgh as well, which means I think they probably have, one more loss in them to get to the playoffs. But I think, I'm not counting them completely out of it. Not for the division. I think it's a two-team race, but I think a wild card wise and potential play, I think Cincinnati could be dangerous.
Cincinnati could be dangerous, Brandon, because they've done it before. They did it
Yes.
with, I think, a 6 seed, and they went on and ran the gauntlet. And if you have the quarterback like Joe Burrow and wide receivers like Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, you're right there. The one issue is, though, they haven't been able to gel on defense for a couple of years. I definitely think that's had them blow some games they shouldn't have lost. They shouldn't have lost to Baltimore last week. They shouldn't have lost to the Patriots to start the season. I believe they started 0-2. They lost to the
They
Reds,
they
to the
they started 0 and
Commanders.
3.
Yeah, they started 0-3. Yeah. So a lot of situations where Cincinnati could have been better, and Steelers and Pittsburgh and Baltimore, they've taken advantage of that.
All right, so this is going to air prior to the Thursday night game in Cleveland, which I don't care what the Browns have looked like. To me, you can throw the records out the window. It's an AFC North football game. It's prime time and all that. But Mike, I'm from the Cleveland area. Me and you both know a ton of Browns fans. I got a bunch of pushback this year because I said the Browns at best, and I mean at best, we're going to win 6 games. Um, I did not like the look of the team. I did not like the feel of the team. And that was even before all this Watson disaster happened. And now, obviously, we know about the torn Achilles. He's going to miss the rest of the year. But so I'll ask you this from a Pittsburgh perspective first. Obviously, I don't think Mike Tomlin in Pittsburgh is going to take the Browns lightly. But there are some matchups that I do feel like over the last few years, at least at home, like the Browns are going to play well against Pittsburgh.
Oh, I believe it. Yeah. I mean, this is the Browns season, honestly. They kind of take a slight pride in feeling like they get the upper hand over the Steelers at home. We remember that game where Mason Rudolph was starting and he threw 5 interceptions. You know, it's just the Browns feel like, this is their last ditch effort. They could somewhat salvage their season, make themselves feel a little bit good because they beat the Steelers one time. You know, I mean, that doesn't make up for, games upon games and years of, I mean, they just made the playoffs, and it's
Yeah.
like you need to think about figuring out and regrouping for next year. You're going to draft a quarterback because that's really the only position they have to draft in. Everywhere else, they're pretty good. So,
So, You know, I last week I had on my buddy Austin Arnold, our buddy from TVT and Bug Show Radio on the show. He's a big Commanders fan. So we previewed the upcoming Commanders Eagles game that's happening tomorrow at the time of this recording. And so we talked, a little Cleveland, what to do with Deshaun Watson. And he's like, if I was them, I would just make them play. I don't care. You paid for it. If he's back healthy next year, he has to play. You got to live with the results. And I'm sitting here going, Mike, I don't care how much the guy makes. I understand they can't cut him and no trade. I don't think they're going to find a team that could trade him. But if I'm them, I think you got to do what you got to do. Keep him on your payroll, but keep him at home. Like he's not allowed to come back. I don't see any scenario where Deshaun Watson is back in that locker room.
when he's lost the locker room, and every situation with Watson gets worse and worse, and the
Yep.
fans rebel against him. I've never seen anything like it personally. Uh, a franchise and a fan base totally reject their quarterback option is crazy. And now he's mentally and physically destroyed.
Yeah.
There's nothing they could do to bring him back.
Um, so in my opinion, there was only 2 teams during the whole football season so far that I've gotten completely wrong, and I'm very disappointed in myself, and I should have seen both coming. One is the Jets, Oh my God, what a disaster that team is. And the others, an even more almost a disaster, the Chicago Bears. Um, Mike, I mean, again, these are two franchises who historically, like Cleveland in a way, have been awful. Obviously Chicago got the number one pick. Caleb Williams was supposed to be the savior of the franchise, and for whatever reason, they upgraded all their personnel and they're not working. And the Jets, it's Aaron Rodgers' team, and they're falling apart.
Right, Brandon. It's unbelievable to see, but I think it comes down to who's the head coach, who's the guy calling the plays. It seems like the Jets and the Bears don't really know what's going on in that department. So I think that's a big deal. I think the game has gotten faster for Aaron Rodgers as he has gotten older. I think that the game continues to be fast for Caleb Williams because I don't think that the offensive coordinator, Shane Waldron, has put him in a position to succeed.
Yeah. You know, is so to me indicative of the head coach is, so Chicago, they go on this three-game winning streak. They're starting 1-2. They beat Jacksonville. They're 4-2. They go to the bye. And when they come out of that bye, it's the game at Washington. And it's the Hail Mary game. And I'm telling you, man, if that was Bill Belichick or if that was Mike Tomlin or Andy Reid or, one of these other coaches, Tyreek Stevenson is not on the football team the next day. Instead, they're still dwelling about this 3 weeks later. The offense hasn't scored a touchdown since. Every week, the players are getting asked about do they trust their head coach. Like, and again, the reason why they brought back Eberflus was they said, well, the defense is getting better, which it did. It got better, and that's Eberflus' side of the ball. But this right now, you are failing your investment and everything you did to turn around a franchise. I have never seen, I don't think on paper, the upgrades that they made, I thought, at skill positions with DeAndre Swift, Roma Dunze, Keenan Allen. They still had DJ Moore. I still like their offensive line, and their offensive line has even regressed.
Right. Well, if you don't have anybody leading your offense, you're in rough shape. I mean, think about all the good offensive teams. You know, think about, their schemes. Think about the Chiefs, think about the Rams, you know, think about the Dolphins. All these great teams that spread the football around. Meanwhile, last year the Steelers had Matt Canada. They made a move, they still made the playoffs. Hey, you know, the Bears are what, 4-5? I mean, they were in playoff position before the past 2 weeks, 3 weeks. They could turn it on, make a run. Not saying that they're going to, but it could happen.
Well,
They
it's
could
going
be
to
a lot.
start this Sunday against Green Bay. That's a big game for them. It's at home. Green Bay, though, is coming out their bye. And I never like that situation for a team when you're facing an offensive coach as clever as Matt before coming off a bye.
Yeah. But I'm just saying, you know, you got to have the right guy running the offense or else it doesn't work.
I mean, I gotta tell you, like, look at Minnesota. Like, everybody's shocked by Minnesota. And to this extent, I didn't think they'd be 7-2 at this point in the year. But I looked at that roster and I said, you're gonna tell me that this roster isn't gonna win, 9, 10 games with those weapons? I mean, I thought Darnold, like I kind of predicted that Sam Darnold would have a Baker Mayfield or even a Geno Smith as Renaissance in Minnesota. And I thought before the year that NFC North with Minnesota, Detroit, Chicago, Green Bay would even be tougher than the AFC North with Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Cincinnati, and obviously Baltimore.
Right, and you've pretty much been true, Brandon. It looks like there might be definitely three playoff teams out of there. You have what many people and what I think is the best football team in the NFL, the Detroit Lions, and then you go forth. You have the Vikings and you have the Packers. Those are all three playoff teams. Those are all three teams that could go to the Super Bowl. You know,
Yeah. Is there anything, that either good or bad for a team or anything like that that has shocked you this year?
let me think. Um, the team that has shocked me, I think it's just the Colt handling of Anthony Richardson. To me, that just feels like, you know, a headache and a lot. because you have an elite running back. You have decent defensive pieces. You have a decent offensive line with all pros on it. Like, what's happening? What is so bad that you can't make Anthony Richardson a guy that could capitalize on his strengths, his physical athletic ability, and run the football? Why can't you run the football? I just think about coaching and, I think about certain situations. I don't know. I mean, it's just, I feel like if the Colts had Harbaugh, they would be leading the AFC South
Yeah.
because if they focused on running the football, they would be excellent. I think the Colts are the biggest shock for me this season. I
Well,
looked at them and I saw a playoff team, and they've disappointed me on a lot of levels.
the one thing I didn't understand, Mike, was Anthony Richardson. Week one, he might have made the throw of the year when he's off his back foot, 70 yards against Houston, perfectly in the air. Um, it's like he can hit the deep ball 70, 80 yards perfectly. But I'm watching him, and some of it is coaching, but some of it is just on him. He's missing the easy, wide open 3, 5 yard on script schedule for us. I mean, you look up and you're watching the game, and Anthony Richardson's 5 for 20 with 200 yards. I don't get it.
Right. Well, and it's going to be interesting because they're bringing him back rest of the
Yeah.
season. We'll see if it gives their offense a spark. But
By
really,
the way, what does that say? Because you've talked about coaching consistency and all that, which what Tomlin does. So I was a big fan of Shane Steichen. Obviously, he was the offensive coordinator for Philadelphia when we went to the Super Bowl a couple years ago. Also worked with Justin Herbert when he was a rookie in LA. I liked Steichen. I thought what he did last year with Gardner Minshew, even getting the Colts, arguably a play away from the playoffs, was remarkable. But when they bench Richardson. And then they say, oh, we're going to Flacco. And it's not just for the short term, it's for the long term for the rest of the season. And then they go back to Richardson 2 weeks later. What does that tell you?
inconsistency, and it shows that their front office and their coaching doesn't have the maturity to be a playoff team. I hope I'm wrong, but I see plenty of teams that have capitalized on their opportunities. You look at teams like Denver, you look at teams like the Chargers. You know, those are all coached by veteran coaches. Baltimore, teams like that. Miami, they've made the playoffs before. They've had coaches that have had success, and they have modern day philosophy. And the Colts are just kind of like the Browns, reactionary.
By the way, um, I get what I'm saying this, but even New England, they may be bad. They may not have a lot of great offensive pieces, but I gotta tell you what, when I watch Drake May, I'm like, that's gonna work. He is moving, he is accurate, he's getting better. And again, he has nothing to work with, and he's getting better. You can live with the interceptions as a rookie. Peyton Manning once, has the all-time interception record as a rookie. So you can live with the turnovers. But I'm watching that going, that's good coaching. We're compared to your point what we're seeing in Indianapolis, Chicago, New York. Like these guys, they can't move the ball.
Right, it's a mess. And if you can't move the ball in the NFL, you can't win.
And I know like we've had this conversation before, Mike. Like when you watch, a Kansas City or even a Buffalo, Baltimore, when they get rolling and they just, the Rams, Detroit, even, San Francisco, Philly, all these teams, they're using motion, they're getting guys the ball, they're moving the ball down the field. And you watch again teams like the Jets, who a 2 yard pass is hard. I don't understand it. It blows my mind.
Right, it's because offenses sometimes aren't designed to move the ball. And it's unfortunate because you got to have the right quarterback and you got to have the right offensive coordinator. Two things.
Yeah, I mean, and that's one of the reasons why I am a bigger fan of, I think, hiring an offensive coach than a defensive coach. But what we have seen now over the past few years, Mike Tomlin's doing it right now in Pittsburgh. McDermott is credit with Joe Brady has gotten the right OC in Buffalo. Dan Quinn in Washington and Cliff Kingsbury. Dan Campbell's letting Ben Johnson do his thing. Even Raheem Morris with Zach Robinson now in Atlanta. I think there is sort of this comeback to defense and running, a little bit at the start of the season. But what we are seeing is you can have a good defensive coach, you can have a good running game, but you need, to your point, if you're going to have a defensive coach, you need a superstar offensive coordinator. The problem is, what happens if that offensive coordinator gets a head coaching job?
Well, you just find another one. You get a you get somebody that the players react in a positive way to, especially like a Ben Johnson. I mean, this Detroit team is so just ridiculously good in so many ways. And if Ben Johnson would ever take a head coaching job, which he'll probably do after they win a Super Bowl, um, you know, find somebody that'll keep, you know, that'll, drink the same water that Dan Campbell has. And, you'll still have an elite team for years to come.
All right, Mike. So speaking of Dan Campbell, I'm going to tie this in because everybody loves Dan Campbell, but everybody hates my head coach, Nick Sirianni. Um, I think they're the same guy. I mean, I look at Nick and I look at Dan Campbell and I see rah-rah, I see aggressive. Everybody says Dan Campbell cost the Lions the NFC Championship game with his, reckless decision making, but they applaud him for it. Maybe Sirianni does occasionally, yes, get too riled up. Maybe he does occasionally go for two more often than I would like. But I would rather have an offensive guy and a more aggressive guy than a more conservative guy. And I think that ultimately you saw it at the end of last year, where obviously my team spiraled out of control for whatever reason. But ever since that bye week, I've seen the fire come back under Sirianni, and you just see it in the team where it looks like they're starting to get their mojo back. And I keep saying my team has won, 11 games at least the last 3 years. He's got to be doing something right.
Well, I think, yeah, he's doing something right. And I actually have a friend from Philadelphia area who's an Eagles fan. His name's Steve Potter. He listens to this show. Basically, every chance he gets, he, rubs it in on Sirianni. He does not like him. He's complained about him. He complained about him since the Eagles lost to the Chiefs in the Super Bowl. I don't get it. I don't get it because it's tough to win 10, 11 games in the NFL. And the Eagles have overcome a lot. AJ Brown injured most of the year. And AJ Brown is the straw that stirs the Jalen Hurts drink, as evident by his
He
stats.
is. I mean, you can make the argument he is the most valuable, not the best, the most valuable wide receiver in the NFL. That's what the numbers tell you.
Right. So I don't see why Sirianni should be criticized. And I think this team is healthy and ready to roll. Are they better than Detroit? No. But I think they're better than, those fringe NFC teams, Minnesota, Arizona, Green Bay, the Bears. I mean, they're the second best team in the NFC.
Yeah, no, I would give Detroit the advantage right now, but I do think this, if Detroit were to slip up or somehow my team would get the number one seed and you have an NFC championship game in Philly, I do think that obviously Philadelphia being in that cold weather, like that's where I think late in the year maybe that does play a little bit of a factor. And I also think, I think Detroit overall is a better team. They may have ordered a better offensive line, maybe just a tiny bit collectively in the skill position front. But my secondary is young and is getting good fast. Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean may be the two best rookie defensive players in the whole NFL.
Hmm. They're tough. And I had the Eagles in fantasy this week in both of my leagues. The league that I'm in with Brandon and my Yahoo league. I had the Eagles back to back in both leagues, and they tore it up. So,
Yeah, I mean, Dallas, obviously it is what it is. Let me just transition to that real quick. Mike, everybody thought I was crazy because I had Philly winning the division this year, but I had Commanders in the second place as a wild card team, and I had Dallas in third place. And I had them at 7, 8 wins. I didn't have them obviously falling off a cliff like they are now because of the Dak injury. But my reasoning wasn't even because of their defense. It was basically because I thought they were a CeeDee Lamb or bust offense. And that's
yeah,
all they have offensively.
yeah. I mean, their offensive line's depleted. I mean, their run defense is terrible.
Yeah.
And they were fully dependent on Dak Prescott this year. And in those years, it doesn't work out well. A few years back, he hurt his ankle or broke his leg, or I believe. And I think they were a different team. This year, they were just way too self-reliant on him. When a guy gets injured, somebody's got to step in. Um, a guy I know, my girlfriend's dad is a big fan of the Cowboys. When they signed Dak Prescott and CD Lamb, all he could tell you was, well, we better get a backup ready. We better get a backup ready because if we don't, we're going to be in trouble. This is why. This is why, because this is a team that could have made a run at a wild card, but instead now they're looking at the basement wondering, what did I do? What
Yeah,
did we
and they didn't spend any money in free agency, which I didn't get. They didn't upgrade the roster at all. They didn't have a plan at running back. When you can't run the ball, when you can't stop the run, you're going to be a bad football team. I am terrified to death, though, of them somehow landing Shador Sanders and Deion Sanders. I don't think it's going to happen, but I don't want them to even be in that territory.
Well, here's the thing though, Brandon. I think they feel like they have to keep up with the NBA for whatever reason. So I think the first father-son duo, coach-player duo could really happen real soon. Let's just say that.
Like that clip from the Brands World podcast? If so, make sure you go down there and hit that subscribe button. While you're down there hitting the subscribe button, make sure to also hit the notification bell so you never miss another upload. And make sure you check out all the other clips from the Brands World podcast right here on YouTube.